Welcome back to New York Wedding Jam, the podcast for modern couples. Jason, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Martine. How's it going with you?
Oh, this week, honestly, one of the things that I've been talking to my couples a lot about is money matters. And I have to tell you, this ends up being one of the most stressful conversations for people. So I really wanted to get into that one today. Frankly,
I
how's your week
yeah.
going?
My week is going good. I've had a few things pop up unexpectedly, but in the wedding industry, things I guess you have to plan for the unexpected, and things that are I didn't expect to happen are happening. But it's fine. I've accounted for some
Fine.
crisis.
It's fine. The world is on fire, but it's fine, Jason.
Yeah, it's the world is on fire, but I knew to bring like what do
A
you bring
fire
for a fire?
extinguisher.
An
A fire
extinguisher?
extinguisher.
I'm
A
not putting out the
blanket.
fire. A blanket, yes, yes. I need to protect myself,
There you
but
go.
I'm
There
not
you go.
putting
That's
out
all you can
fires for
do.
sure. Yeah,
I understand. I understand. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you got to let it burn.
but I want to just kind of start off talking about this wedding budget business by, again, as I said in the intro, I'm a wedding vendor. I'm a videographer, but I still kind of consider myself a newlywed because I still remember the experiences that I went through when planning our wedding. I should say, assisting my wife planning our wedding. But
Were you one of
but
those in the background there, Jason?
I was a
A
supportive
supporter?
fiance. Yes, I was a cheerleader. But one thing I remember experiencing was sticker shock, and just
Yeah.
you say it a lot. You don't know what you don't know, and of course, it was my first time getting married, and we were just like, what and how much and why does this have to be that? And but yeah, it was certainly, I wish I had an education on budgeting early on in our process, but we made it through. But it's an important topic.
For sure. And I think one of the things that's important for people to know that you might not, because people don't necessarily tell you this, is there is a method to the madness, right? And so, look, a wedding can cost whatever you want it to cost ultimately, or whatever you need it to cost, because there's money there. But you're going to have to make some decisions about how you spend that money. And when you're coming into it with no experience or education on it, that can be hard, right? To decide how you're going to spend money when you don't know what that money should be spent on. So one of the first things that I tell my couples is to make sure that they understand that the number of people that you invite is a direct reflection on how much money you're going to spend for your wedding. The more people you have, the more expensive it's going to be overall. And that's not just on the venue, food, and beverage side.
I was just
Because,
going to ask that question because in a
yeah,
previous episode we talked about the venue costing 50 to 60%. So if you pack more people into a venue, there's going to be more dollars spent into that 50 to 60%. But you're saying it doesn't just stop there.
well, there's also flowers and decor, and if you're doing any of the venue that you select ultimately has something to do with the number of people that you can invite, right? And how much space there is there. The logistics of do we have to pay for transportation for people to come to the wedding based on where it is, and the more people you have, the more, the hotel that you might need to reserve, the flowers that are going to be on the table, the gifts that you have to buy, etc. So there's so many other factors, invitation costs, etc. There's so many other things that also add up that people don't usually think about, adding those pieces to the budget for people. So for example, I've heard parents say many, many times, well, we'll pay for that person to come. And like, that's lovely, mom and dad. Thank you so much for paying for this person. But that doesn't pay for the flowers that I now also need to add to this. It doesn't pay for the, the favors that we're planning on packaging in, or the amount of time that I need from a photographer because we've exponentially increased our wedding party size, for example. So things like that actually do start to make a difference. If you're paying for, hair and makeup for your wedding party, having a larger wedding party is going to be more expensive, right? Things like that I don't think people often think of beyond the food cost itself, because that then tends to be a fixed cost that you'll know early on in the process. But when we're adding people to the list, you have to remember that we're not just adding the one thing and it changes the flavor of what you're doing. So that's the part that I really wish people knew more about wedding budgets, is that there is a science to it. So beyond the 50 to 60%, but there are other categories that you're going
But
to have to
hold
spend
on.
money on too.
Let's
Yeah.
pause. I have a question for you, and I'm actually
Yes.
glad that you're a planner because we can talk about this. So, is it a 1-to-1 ratio? So let me pose a question to you.
Yes.
If, and I'm just throwing out random dumb numbers because
Sure.
okay, let's say it costs $50,000 for 100 people. Okay, let's just
Okay.
say.
Okay.
Does it cost 100,000 for 200 people? Does it literally double if you have double the number of people, or is that formula? Do you get more efficient with your money as the audience grows? And I'm not counting, like, let's not count a bridal party because that will obviously increase it. But let's just say your bridal party's locked, but now you've increased it by 100 guests. Does your budget now double?
Not necessarily, right? There are some costs that end up being a little bit more fixed than the food and beverage costs on the guest count, but it's always hard to tell. So that's why it's, when I give the range of 50 to 60%, it's 50 to 60%. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody spends the exact same amount of money on venue, food, and beverage, but adding more people. So, okay, maybe at this point we've locked in our photographer and we've paid, whatever we've paid for the photographer on that point, which usually is around the 10% mark, right? But what tends to happen, truthfully, what tends to happen for most people, and the reason it ends up being 50 to 60%, is because you start adding other things depending on the type of wedding you're planning. And the more people you're planning for, the more traditional it starts to feel and the more things you end up adding to it. So the budget ends up growing because, well, we're already adding these people. We want to make sure that they have X experience. And so you need to add these other factors to make sure that the experience stays the same. So is it going to be guaranteed double? No. But it's still going to increase your budget. And again, that's usually where you're spending most of your money regardless, right? Is on that piece of it. So adding more people doesn't take away from the fixed costs of everything else. And maybe you found the fixed costs and you found, like, really good rates or whatever else it is that you ended up trying to do for your budget. But what I see typically happen is, we wanted this location, and so the vendor team's got to match the experience that we're planning here, which means that the budget starts to match that experience that you're planning for. And so you end up spending more money on the experiential piece of it in addition to the head count and the food and the beverage.
Gotcha. Because, I'm thinking, well, why does the photo booth need more money? Why does the photographer, videographer need more money? Why does the DJ can play and MC plays the same to 100 people as he does to 200 people? But certainly, and so that's why I asked you that. I wanted to see if it was a 1-to-1 relationship.
And it's not necessarily,
but it's not.
But for example, I'll give you a couple of examples where things might start changing. If you have 50 people, we might only need the photo booth for a couple of hours. But if we've got 200 people, now we've got to have the photo booth for 4 or 5 hours, right? Or if you had your photographer originally for 8 hours, but now we've extended it so that there's so many more people that need photos, and so we need the photographer for a little bit more time, right? And so now we've got to pay for the extra time for the photographer. Maybe we originally had a smaller party in mind, but now we need additional assistance from some of the other vendors in order to manage this same space and time. And so there are things that do start to change, again, to keep the same experience, even though the guest count has grown. some things aren't going to change, right? Like there, like I said, there's some things that it is what it is. Like, to give you an example, uh, you might have a your wedding dress, the whatever you've paid for your wedding dress isn't going to change if you add more people, right? The price that you've paid for the officiant, if you have to do that, and the service that you've had for the ceremony isn't going to change, for a ceremony that's of the same length and size and caliber, right? So things like that, not everything changes, but there are definitely some things that do change. The size of the cake that you have is going to change, right? For if you're going to have cake or desserts. So things like that you also then have to add to that venue food and beverage amount, or the number of flowers that you have, that is going to change depending on the number of tables that you have. Maybe you're doing special place settings or invitations, that is going to change based on the number of people that you have. So there are a lot of things that do change. There are some things that can stay the same. Depends on where you started and where you moved to, for sure.
So what are some things that people, how can someone get started, Martine? Like they're just engaged as we're just coming out of the holiday season. And so what should someone do as a first step to begin thinking about how much should I begin to think about setting aside? 30,000, 50,000, 100,000. How does someone get started thinking about this?
So I always suggest, at the very least, looking at the average in your area. Now that's just an average, right? Some people are going to be up above or below, but at least it gives you a starting point to look at it. In this area of the world, truthfully, 40 to 50,000 is about average, in this area of the world. That might be different than what you see on the national average, but every place is different. New York's kind of expensive place, right? So we got to keep that in mind. But it's just an average, right? And so the thing is, it may be above or below that depending on what you want, but it at least gives you a starting point for framework for average wedding size, and in this area of the world where you're starting to look. I think the other thing to keep in mind is, again, that 50 to 60% mark on the venue piece. So if you are venue shopping before you've done anything else, if you've already spent the money on the venue, just double it, and at least that'll give you kind of a realistic view. So maybe you overspent on the venue, right? And when I say that, like, people don't know what they don't know. Maybe you spent more than you should have, or more than you were planning on spending all up on the venue. But realistically speaking, to give everything else some breathing room, you're going to want that 50 to 60% mark on the venue piece. So if you've already spent that, that's another way to look at it. The other thing that I like people to consider is who's paying. Is it just the couple? Is it our parents donating any money? Sometimes I've had like really nice best friends gift different pieces of the wedding to their friends. I don't know. So all of those things to keep in mind, like, is there any other money that's coming in here? But that the wedding budget also should include all the things, right? So from soup to nuts, right? We're talking everything from attire and rings down to the last spoon that we're placing near a plate. So everything should be included in that all up budget, and understanding that ultimately the experience you're trying to have is going to dictate where those dollars go.
Yeah, I mean, super important. Like I started the episode, I said people have no clue. I had no clue, and I think most people, at all budgets, right? Whether you are a lower budget or higher budget, most people do not know what this is like until they start planning for it. So I think this was an incredibly important episode, Martine, and I'm so happy that you're here, because I'm even learning things, and I get to ask you like dumb questions about doubling guest counts, which nobody really does. But I just wanted to play with some numbers.
I've had
Oh,
people do
really?
it. Yeah, yeah,
Double their
it's
guest
happened.
count.
It's
Oh
happened.
my God.
So again, I think it is important. It's all part of the conversation, Jason. But it is always a pleasure speaking with you. Happy to help answer all the questions, and I'm hoping we get some people on the right track a little bit quicker.
I think so. I mean, I'm on the right track. So now that
Now that you're
but
a
thanks.
vendor.
Yeah, right. Okay, Martine, thank you so much. It was great chatting with you, and I'll see you in the next episode.
All right, sounds good. Bye.
Bye.